And most welcome to 1370 of the series. We are presently sitting at the diner called Tintin. You can see all posters from the books, and I think this was even a movie, if I'm not recalling. I will today continue with a rather enlarged article, but very good, by Stephen M. Rosen. The strange nature of quantum perception. To see a photon, one must be a photon. I am currently at page 239. The paragraph is ontological phenomenology. Husserl's epistemological phenomenology was succeeded by the ontological phenomenologies of Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty. In their writings, the emphasis shifts from apodictic knowing to an investigation of being as such. This is especially true in the late works of these philosophers. For our purposes, ontological phenomenology can be seen most essentially as a critique of the classical trichotomy of object in space before subject. To Merleau-Ponty, the activities of the detached Cartesian subject are idealizing objectifications of the world that conceal the concrete reality of the life world. A term Merleau-Ponty borrowed from Husserl but put to different use. Obscured by the lofty abstractions of European science, this earthy realm of lived experience is inhabited by subjects that are not anonymous. That do not fly above the world, exerting their influence from afar.
Det är den där snygga grannkillen som är 1,5 år.
faktiskt en.
In the life world,
En pappa då som jag
the
har gått lite
subject
promenader
is
med.
fully
De har en
situated,
liten Walter.
fully fledged participant, engaging in transactions so intimately entangling that it can no longer rightly be taken
Mamma och pappa.
as separated either from its objects
Eller jag
or
skulle säga.
from
Det är
the
liksom
worldly context
Och
itself.
sen är det inte säkert att det bara är pappa. Att det bara är det jag som är pappa? Ja, det är din pappa det. Och är det min Mia där? Är det min Mia? Har du suttit still alldeles för länge?
As Heidegger put it, the down-to-earth subject is
Nej.
a being in
Du
the
har
world.
suttit i bilen och sen så jag skulle ha låtit dig få gå hit. Ja, jag skulle ha låtit dig få gå lite. Jag tänkte inte så långt. Jag tror att vi skulle sitta så här också. Det blev lite tokigt.
Inget barn kan sitta längre.
Nej, men det märker vi om man...
It is clear that all three terms of the classical formula,
Det blir...
object, space and subject,
Ja, du får inte
are
vänta för
affected.
länge, för då äter pappa upp dina pannkakor.
Ja, skynda dig.
Ja, det är din pappa. Jag är din pappa. Och du är min Mia. Min pannkaksmia. Vet du vad,
are
Mia?
taken as simply external to each other and as appearing within a spatial continuum of sheer externality.
Ja,
Eller det förra för henne.
nej det tror jag inte. Om du inte vill ha dem helt nedläggande.
Nej men, vad är det för något? Vad är det för någonting?
Since the continuum is deemed infinitely divisible,
Klick, klick, klick. Vad säger den? Klick, klick.
as philosopher Milit Čapek put it, in questioning the classical notion of space. No matter how minute a spatial interval may be,
Har ni både vind och källare?
it must always be an interval separating 2 points, each of which is external to the other.
Är det någon? Va?
Titta här är ett blad. Har du sett? Ett blad. Ja, det finns på träden. Vad är träden någonstans? Har du sett? Där är ett blad. Det är ett blad. Titta. Det är ett blad. Ett träd.
Heidegger thus speaks of conventional space as the outside of one another, of the multiplicity of points.
Jordgubb och kläder. Lite konstig blandning så.
Var det svart te då?
Ja, svart te. Det är lite...
The agents operating upon the objects constitute a third kind of externality.
Nej, hon är...
Acting as they do from a transcendent vantage point beyond the objects in space.
och djur och ja, men, så. Vill gärna liksom showa lite så. Gärna vara lite så i centrum så. Det är inget fel att vara.
Typiskt. Vill du vara i centrum?
Min far, har du, när du har varit uppe på landet, har du sett? Min fars gumma har en liten hund. Och Mia blir ju så, alltså hon vill ju gå på den här hunden och klappa. Och
It is this privileging of external relations that is counteracted by ontological phenomenology.
Nej, och så varenda ny sak den gör. Oj, vad gör du? Oj, då måste jag gå och kolla eller klappa så.
Notwithstanding the Cartesian idealization of the world, in the underlying life world, there is no object with boundaries so sharply defined that it is closed off completely from other objects.
Mamma, du är allergisk mot ljud. Så när jag blir stor så ska jag flytta och så skaffar jag hund någonstans. Men vill du sakna mamma? Nej. Men vem ska natta dig? Jag kan somna själv.
The life world is characterized instead by the transpermeation of objects. The superposition in quantum parlance.
Det är väl alla barns favorit, antar jag.
Men kunde du laga pasta när du var 20 år?
Ja. Vad kunde du laga då?
Ingenting.
När du var 20 år? Jo, men när du kom hem, alltså nu var det första man gjorde.
Mutual interpenetration.
Ja, men det är typ samma, så snabbmakaroner tog ju typ lika...
By the reciprocal insertion and intertwining of one in the other.
För då var jag på de här sista frysbitar och mikropajer och allting som jag köpte.
Men när bodde du i Barcelona?
När jag var 23.
Det var ju, okej, det var när du kom. Det var då det liksom, då var det där. Jag tycker det är jättekonstigt att inte du...
With objects hence related by way of mutual containment, no separate container is required to mediate their relations.
Men hon brukar, nu vet jag inte vad klockan är.
Klockan är
Halv 11.
As would have to be the case with externally related objects.
Nej, men då.
Det är för spännande.
Det kan vara det.
De just hungriga i bilen på väg hem.
Objects are therefore no longer to be thought of as contained in space, like things in a box.
Då kanske det också blir fördröjning.
Annars borde du ge henne någon bulle lite senare.
Ja, jag har med mig en sån här...
En hel hög med mat.
Nej, men en gröt och en spagetti.
Det var länge sedan man här köpte såna grejer.
Jag tycker fortfarande att vi... Oj! Vad är dina saker i?
For in containing each other, they contain themselves.
hon älskar alltså alla knappar och dragkedjor.
Du kanske ska bli designer.
Nej, det är där de får Nergus leka med själva. Det är vuxen saker.
Hon kan inte ta ut dem ändå. Sitter stenhårt.
At the same time, it must also be understood that in the life world there can be no parametric division of object and subject.
Men går inte du och Eva-Lena heter hon, va? Eva-Karin. Går inte ni på AV då om ni...
Nej, men hon bor ju i Växjö, Eva-Karin.
Limetvig.
Ja.
Som du jobbar med?
Nej, du menar Lisa tänker du på?
Lisa tänker jag.
Nej, Lisa är ju med mig varje dag, 5 dagar i veckan, så hon vill inte träffa mig på henne.
Nej, men efter, alltså AV, alltså efter att man går ut efter...
Nej, hon vill inte gå på sånt och träffa. Hon är enstörning på jobbet, sitter hon på kontoret hela dagen, även till lunchen. Så hon umgås bara med mig och...
The life world subject, far from being the disengaged, high-flying deus ex machina of Descartes, or even Husserl's transcendental subject.
Nej, men AV tänker det. Då bjuder man ju med hela kontoret liksom så.
Ja, när de 2 gångerna de hade efteråt, då kunde inte jag.
Finds itself down among the objects as one of the visibles. It is itself always an object to some other subject.
Alltså, träffas man hela dagarna på kontoret och om man inte har det intresset av att kanske gå ut och då kanske inte
So that the simple distinction between subject and object is confounded, and we no longer know which sees and which is seen. My comment here is the voice of the friend doesn't take a sender nor a receiver. End of my quote.
Jag har någon som pratar för mycket, så man får inte säga själv för mycket, för då kan man höra det någon annanstans.
Gud vad roligt.
The ontological grounding of the subject is thus indicative of the close interplay of subject and object in the life world.
Det är en sån här liten korridor, du vet.
Ja, men så känner vi igen från ÖB också, så att alltså vissa, jag skulle kunna rabbla vissa namn där jag tyckte liksom betedde sig dåligt sådär. Som inte heller
Generally speaking then, what the move from classical thinking to ontological phenomenology essentially entails is an internalization of the relations among subject, object and space.
Sen är det ju typ min nya kollega som är 37 kanske. Sen är det jag och Lisa som är 42. Och resten är äldre då. Så det är en
kärringyrke.
Man säger kärringar.
Ja. Nej, jag tillhör ju de äldre.
The depth dimension.
30.
The link between the life world and the quantum world should already be broadly evident.
Nu är det massa nyexade tjejer då. Finns ju inga killar på socialtjänsten.
With the former, the classical continuum is supplanted by
Det skiljer nog väldigt
an internally constituted space of superposed entities featuring the intimate interaction of subject and object.
Jag anser det för extremt, som de unga är väldigt...
Ja, men de har ju inte barn heller nu.
Nej, gud nej.
Så att
De vet ingenting.
nej, så att det är ju... Där blir det ju en...
A more specific articulation of the phenomenological response to the problem of grasping quantum reality can be derived from another work of Merleau-Ponty.
Av 40 inbjudningar så är det 5 andra kanske. Ja, men Mia, du kladdade ju ner Maurice väska.
Det gör inget. Det är lättorkad. Bara du inte stoppar i en...
Ja, du kollar. Du ser här.
In his essay, I and Mind, his concept of depth provides an account of dimensionality that permits us to better understand the limitations of Cartesian space and to surpass them.
Jag kan tvinga i henne lite mat och så kan vi röra på oss.
Ska vi gå ut, Mia? Ska vi gå ut och titta på bilarna? Ska vi gå ut och titta på bilar? Ja. Mycket bilar här ute. Ja.
For Descartes, notes Merleau-Ponty, a dimension is an extensive continuum entailing absolute positivity.
Då kanske det nya kontoret inte har någon sån sammanhållning.
Nej, men inte med mig då i alla fall. Att de känner att... För att de som kom var ju kanske sådana som man hade umgåtts lite mer med. Och de man kanske inte gillar lika mycket.
Descartes'
då är det ju lätt
assumption is that space simply is there.
Jag inte tänkte att jag har försökt i alla fall. Och som sagt, det var viktigt att alla i alla fall kände att de hade fått en inbjudan så att det inte skulle vara något att...
That it subsists as a positive presence possessing no faults or nuances, no shadows, shadings or subtle gradations, no internal dynamism. My comment here have to be that it's amazing that those tendencies were long before 1689 established, maybe coming from the Cartesian coordinates or with an even longer history.
Ja, vi har bara pannkakor och grädde och sylt så att det är gott men det täcker inte hela kostcykeln.
Men det är väldigt gott. Jag får torsdagarna.
Space is thus taken as the utterly explicit openness that constitutes a field of strictly external relations wherein unambiguous measurements can be made.
Men du kan få Mia, du kan få vatten.
All along with height and width, depth is but the third dimension of this hypostasized three-dimensional field.
Ja. Min far har en sägning när man liksom anordnar middagar eller fester och man alltid är lite orolig att maten inte ska räcka till och det...
Merleau-Ponty contrasts the Cartesian view of depth with the animated depth of the life world.
Första gången utan att man ser verkligen till att gästerna då får.
Where we discover in the dialectical action of perceptual experience a paradoxical interplay of the visible and invisible, of identity and difference.
Alltså man tänker så galet.
En del äter verkligen väldigt mycket.
Ja men och så tänker man att alla, men folk, alla som kommer till fest, ja, men så family holds back. Då får man liksom i det tysta då, det är en tyst överenskommelse att liksom den
the enigma consists in the fact that I see things.
Om man då märker av.
Each one in its place, precisely because they eclipse one another.
Nej men jag tycker att även svenska, alltså, det är inte av alltså, nödvändigtvis generositet
and that there are rivals before my sight, precisely because each one is in its own place.
Så att det känns som att det är liksom...
Jag vet att när jag är hemma hos svärmor så lagar man lagom. Och så vill jag är en potatisälskare. Och när jag ser att hon bara har kokat sådär lite potatis, då tänker jag, då får jag bara ta 2 potatisar. 2 små. Sen kan jag inte ta det för då räcker det.
Their exteriority is known in their envelopment and their mutual dependence in their autonomy.
Ja men nu tar jag i. Dels då för att man inte vill stå där och maten inte räcker, men dagen efter så är det ju perfekt att ha. Men jag fattar inte heller de som gör liksom enligt receptet liksom.
Once depth is understood in this way, we can no longer call it a third dimension.
Ska pappa blåsa?
Oj, ja, nu blev det bra.
In the first place, if it were a dimension, it would be the first of one. There are forms and definite planes only if it is stipulated how far from me the different parts are. But a first dimension that contains all the others is no longer a dimension. At least in the ordinary sense of a certain relationship according to which we make measurements. Depth thus understood is rather the experience of the reversibility of dimensions.
Sen så skulle hon kanske få fast anställning på ÖBC-skolan.
Aha.
Så hon kanske har flyttat bort dit till dem.
Men var bor hon? Okej,
Of
så
a
det är
global
Siren,
locality.
jag vet inte om man är inte jättebra förbindelser.
Everything in the same place at the same time, a locality from which height, width and depth, the classical dimensions,
Åker ut
are
från Torg då,
abstracted.
Och därifrån buss.
End of quote.
eller? Jag,
My comment comes
Ja.
directly.
jag var faktiskt,
The three
jag ville
Nobel
faktiskt,
laureates,
jag ville faktiskt,
Aspect,
jag tänkte
Klauser
gå in på
and
ÖB och
Salinger
handla idag.
are saying something
För att jag tyckte att
very
deras
similar
annonsblad
when
hade
it comes
typ
to
Coca-Cola,
global take.
annonsbladet, så att,
although
Här är de chips.
Merleau-Ponty
ja,
happened to
det-
use
om jag
what
inte
he
blandar
calls
ihop med
local.
någon annan så är det mycket
It
möjligt att
is
de hade
the same
också.
as
Ja,
the
så i
universe.
butiken är det nu för tiden 33 kronor
Height,
eller
width
35.
and
De har
depth
höjt den.
are
Jag köpte
derived
ostbollar för typ
concepts.
33 eller något sånt där.
End of my comment.
Det kostar ju mellan 22 och 24. Nej men är det mätt nu? Är det mätt? Det är inte mätt. Nej.
Speaking in the same vein,
Det är mätt.
Merleau-Ponty
Är magen mätt?
characterizes depth
Frågan är om jag
as
kan
a single dimensionality, a polymorphous being.
Mm.
From which the Cartesian dimensions
se vart den här
of
påsklämman
linear extension derive,
hamnar. Den ligger kanske.
and which justifies all Cartesian dimensions without being fully expressed by any.
Ja,
Påsklämman, är den i magen?
The dimension of depth
jag ställer den. Den är upprätt nu ändå så att det brukar inte
is
läggas
both
mycket.
natal space and matrix
Väldigt mycket
of
rätt.
every other existing space.
Jag har ju Zelda nu på jobbet sen 2 veckor tillbaka.
2 veckor tillbaka var det du som fixade in henne. Här var den.
Jag hade hjälpande hand där i alla fall. Jag tipsade jag sa till henne att en vän har sökt.
Merleau-Ponty proceeds to explore the depth dimension via the artwork of Cézanne.
Kom du ut stolen?
Den här. Ska vi sätta den på väskan igen? Mias som sagt
Through the
under
painter,
vintermånaden så
he
är det inte så
demonstrates
lätt
that
att leka.
primal dimensionality is self-containing.
Så, ska vi gå och byta blöja Mia? Då ska vi gå och undvika bilar sen.
Cézanne works with a visual space that is not abstracted from its content, but flows unbrokenly into it.
10.51. Jo,
Or putting it
jag tänker...
the other way around,
Jag kom inte in i parkeringsgaraget.
Vi går ju tillsammans.
Ja, jag menar det. Men då, vi hinner kanske inte
the
stadsbilar.
contents of a Cézanne painting overspill their boundaries so that, rather than merely being contained like objects in an empty box, they fully participate in the containment process. Inspired by Cézanne's paintings, Merleau-Ponty comments that we must seek space and its content as together. Merleau-Ponty also makes it clear that the primal dimension engages embodied subjectivity. The dimension of depth
Ska vi gå till biblioteket? Om man inte har färg så kan vi bara byta henne här på bara kiss.
Ja, det var bara kiss. Men,
Nej, men
goes toward things from
vi kan ta det.
as starting point
Det kan avvakta.
this body to which I myself am fastened.
Hon hade så många lager. Får du sålt dina? Jag ser ibland att du lägger ut lite saker på i the marketplace.
In commenting there are forms and definite planes only if it is stipulated how far from me their different parts are.
Köper.
Ja, alltså overallerna gick åt jättesnabbt på bara några dagar.
Ja, vad bra.
Allt annat var inte så. Det har ju BIBTEX och det har lite olika babygrejer.
Merleau-Ponty is conveying the same idea.
Ja, en sele.
En bärsele?
Ja, så jag vet inte hur jag ska presentera den.
A little later he goes further.
Jag vill ha en sån man sätter på axlarna. Som man kan.
The painter's vision is not a view upon the outside, a merely physical optical relation with the world. The world no longer stands before him through representation,
Ja.
rather it is the painter to whom the things of the world give birth by a sort of concentration or coming to itself of the visible. Ultimately, the painting relates to nothing at all among experienced things, unless it is first of all auto-figurative.
har Pontus berättat att han hjälper oss med ett kött.
Ja. Fick han till någon bra design?
Jag hann faktiskt inte jag hann inte kolla på den nya draften än.
In this passage, the painting of which Merleau-Ponty speaks, in drawing upon the originary dimension of depth, draws in upon itself. Painting of this kind is not merely a signification of objects, but a concrete self-signification that surpasses the division of object and subject. In sum, the phenomenological dimension of depth, as described by Merleau-Ponty, is 1. The first dimension, 2. Inasmuch as it is the source of the Cartesian dimensions, which are idealizations of it. 2. A self-containing dimension, not merely a container for contents that are taken as separate from it. And 3. A dimension that blends subject and object concretely, rather than serving as a static staging platform for the objectification of a detached subject. Therefore, in realizing depth, we go beyond the concept of space as but an inert container and come to understand it as an aspect of a self-containing, indivisible cycle of life-world action in which subject and object are integrally incorporated. An action cycle of this kind lies at the core of quantum mechanics. The most basic equation of the quantum world is given by Planck. 1 Planck equals E to HV. This equation for the energy of the photon can be rewritten so that Planck's constant H expresses action. We do this by replacing frequency V with its inverse, namely time. We then have E equals H through T, or H equals E times T. And in physics, energy multiplied by time is a measure of action. The angularity of quantized action, its internal spin, is expressed by the application of phase. As given in the formula H through 2 pi equals H hat. Here H is operated upon by a phase of 2 pi radians. Equivalent to a turn of 360 degrees. In quantum mechanics, H hat is regarded as a fundamental atom of process. One not reducible to smaller units that could be applied in quantitative analysis. The discontinuity associated with quantized microphysical action bespeaks the fact that this indivisible circulation undermines the infinitely divisible classical continuum. And along with it, the idealized objects purported to be enclosed in said continuum, and the idealized subject alleged to stand outside it. The action in question entails the superposition of object, space, and subject. Something utterly unthinkable when adhering to the classical formula. It is only through probabilistic artifice that such a dialectic can be accommodated while maintaining the old trichotomy. My comment here is, here Rosen so clearly points to the fact of incompatibility, that it comes to a breakdown for the old formula. And just such a dialectic defines the depth dimension as described by Merleau-Ponty. Broadly speaking, this suggests that if the quantum world is to be understood, a whole new basis for scientific activity is required. A new way of thinking about object, space, and subject. One cast along the lines of Merleau-Pontian depth. I will make a little summary here before we take questions, and then I toggle for another 50 minutes. As a summary, let me once more point to the sharpness of Merleau-Ponty and how he clearly exposes why not call them holes in the classical formula, where object in space in front of subject breaks down and actually becomes incomprehensible. We have to add to this, it stops knowing, stops you from being able to localize, and whenever or wherever or however you want to call it, mental space or physical space, Merleau-Ponty and Rosen shows it breaks down here. The distinction cannot intellectually be upheld. It purely doesn't make any sense. The second aspect is we also see our regular dimensions of three orthogonal directions of x, y, z are secondary. They are not the original dimensions. This is the one-dimensionality that Merleau-Ponty is referring to. A one-dimensionality that is archi-perceptual, if you like, or is part of what covers the seer, the original force or foundation for everything, before the superposition, a priori, but not before in time, but before, because time is something that develops after. This is hard to grasp, but using space in this way can help you to the understanding that time itself has a before, which oddly enough is not part of the order, the ordinal numbers. Maybe there's a question here. Sorry about the music, but I think this microphone can cover it.
Hello. So I was thinking about that. Also, Carol Rovelli says that the primary thing is relationships, and like space and time are derived from that. And in Descartes, I think we have to put things in chronological perspective. So Descartes, he died in 1650, and we know he died in Stockholm in 1650, and 4 years later Queen Christina abdicated, and Descartes was Queen Christina's guest in Stockholm. Okay, so I think so 1650 is a good date to remember. And Newton, he was born 8 years before, 1642, so he was 8 years old, more or less, when Descartes died. So Newton was probably influenced by Descartes, because Descartes was an influential figure. And what do Newton and Descartes have in common? Probably the thing that the space doesn't have any qualities, everything is uniform. So Descartes and Newton are the same, more or less. The vision of space is the same. That is, it doesn't have any qualities. And that's my. And then I would also like to comment on. There is one good phrase here in Rosen's paper, namely, the sun works with a visual space that is not abstracted from its content, but flows unbrokenly into it. So that is, it's also good description of Klein bottle. It made me think about Klein bottle. And you could also use that phrase to describe any painting, work of art, I think. Even though it's more clear in Cézanne. That is the point. It made me also think about work by Derrida, Truth in Painting, entire book, The Truth in Painting, where he analyzes different artworks, that he shows that there is really no difference between frame and the content, that is between form and the content. And okay, in Cézanne it's very clear this that the content is the same as the form. You cannot distinguish between them, like the Klein bottle. In some other works it is more difficult. Like we could take this as an example. We could reflect a little bit on this. This is perhaps a banal example of work of art. Perhaps we could reflect a little bit this. Here, could we say that form and content are the same in this tinted poster? I don't know. It's less clear here, but here you have space. In two senses, you have a space where they're going. But space is also it has 3 dimensions. You see the mountains there, it has depth. So you cannot say that the space that they are going is separated from the space depth. Don't you agree, Hans? And let me give it back to you.
Well, once more, put in another way, at another approach, we have a problem of form versus content. In the Smolian depiction, it is the landscape. In linguistic extension, in contrast to intention. In the Saussurean conception, we have signified and sign, and I would say sign is equivalent to form, and signified is content.
Very good.
So we see the same thing returning, but it is so great to have it from different approaches, because in a way this cannot be approached directly head on, because then you use words, concepts, and it could awaken old associations of object in space in front of a subject. So this is a leaner, smoother way of going ahead. And of course, as you mentioned, it is they lie in the same zeitgeist. There is a development, and Newton was absolutely dependent on the three-dimensional structure, the Cartesian system. Nothing of Newton would have come without that. And they oddly imply that space is inert, homogeneous, and not active in the process. It is giving those clear gestalt, clear indications. Could you put it this way? Modeling quantum perception. This paper began with a brief description of recent research investigating the ability of human beings to detect single photons and possibly even to observe the underlying quantum realm itself. The key question for us is what this observation would entail. To facilitate an understanding of what quantum perception actually involves. The previous section was devoted to examining the quantum world more closely. This exploration led to the proposition that the submicroscopic domain is best comprehended in terms of Merleau-Ponty's depth dimension. While the Cartesian intuition of object in space before subject makes it impossible to come to grips with the discontinuity and intimate subject-object interaction of the quantum realm. Merleau-Ponty's intuition gives us the insight we need. But can the philosophical notion of depth be brought into sharper focus to make it more relevant to the specific problem of observing the photon? For this, we turn to a well-known figure from the psychology of perception. The Necker-Cube, a perceptual model of the quantum wave and quantum observation. Over the years, there have has been much research in the field of bistable perception. The dynamic oscillation of perceptual experience when an ambiguous stimulus is observed. Perhaps the most widely studied stimulus of this kind is the Necker cube, based on the 1832 observations of crystallographer Louis Necker. Atmansbacher, Filk and Römer noted accordingly that the Necker cube is a very simple and often investigated example of bistable perception. The Necker cube is a reversible figure that projects opposing three-dimensional perspectives from a two-dimensional plane. You may be perceiving the cube from the point of view in which it seems to be hovering above your line of vision, when suddenly a spontaneous shift occurs and you see it as if it lay below. Two distinct perspectives thus are experienced in the course of gazing at the cube. Yet the cube's reversing viewpoints overlap one another in space, are internally related, completely interdependent. The Necker cube's quantum-like flipping of perspectives brings to mind the discontinuous phenomena of microphysics. And in fact, a number of researchers have systematically studied the relationship of the cube and similar ambiguous stimuli to quantum mechanics. Atmansbacher, Filk and Römer 2004 used a generalized quantum theoretical framework to model the dynamics of the bistable perception of ambiguous visual stimuli, such as the Necker cube. Conte, Karinikov and Torarelli et al. likewise conclude that mental states during perception and cognition of ambiguous figures follow quantum mechanics in the same vein. Cagliotti, Benedek and Cocchiarella asserted that general terms we can say that perceptual ambiguity is equivalent in the microscopic world to the superposition of quantum states. More recently, Benedek and Cagliotti reaffirmed that the perceptual reversal of the Necker cube is controlled by the principles of quantum mechanics. And that the observation of an ambiguous figure is apparently of quantum nature. Of course, when we observe the cube, we ordinarily notice but a single perspective, not the state of ambiguity from which that perspective arises. That is an incredibly important point to make. When we observe the cube, we ordinarily notice but a single perspective and, very important, not the state of ambiguity from which that perspective arises. The initially ambiguous situation may be taken as pre-conscious, as the potential state of consciousness. From which a particular perspective of the cube is consciously actualized. In Comte's quantum mechanical formulation, we distinguish a potential and an actual or manifest state of consciousness. The state of the potential consciousness will be represented by a vector in Hilbert space. If we indicate, for example, a bidimensional case with potential states 1 and 2, the potential state of consciousness will be given by their superposition, psi equals A for 1 plus B for 2. Here, A and B represent probability amplitudes, so that A up to 2 will give the probability that the state of consciousness represented by percept 1 will be finally actualized. Or manifested during perception. Conversely, B to 2 will represent the probability that state percept 2 of consciousness will be actualized or manifested during perception. It will be A to 2 and B to 2 equals 1. Percept 1 and percept 2 express opposing perspectives of the Necker cube. What we are seeing here is that before a single perspective comes into conscious focus, it exists preconsciously as a potential that overlaps with its alter perspective. Analogous to the superposition of quantum states that comprises the not yet observed quantum wave. My comment here is we are strictly talking about the before. The wave of potentiality is still not collapsed or observed. End of my comment. Then, upon observation, the cube collapses to a single perspective. A single quantum state. In the analogy, in keeping with Bohr's principle of complementarity, rendering conjoined states mutually exclusive in their actualization. We can be aware that multiple representations are possible, but we can perceive them only one at a time, that is serially. From Conte et al., page 9 of the 2009 article. And yet, Conte goes on to comment that quantum functioning could explain the peculiar human ability to hold contradictory notions in mind simultaneously. Although usually there is a collapse to one state or the other. In past work, I have demonstrated that the strong tendency to consciously perceive only one perspective of the Necker cube at a time can indeed be overcome. Instead of allowing our glance to alternate between the opposing perspectives of the cube, we can break this visual habit and view both perspectives at the same time. This possibility is confirmed in artist Rune Ernst's study of the graphic work of M.C. Escher. In analyzing an Escher work titled Belvedere, Ernst concludes that its design is based on the Necker cube. To bring out the underlying principle of Belvedere, Ernst provides his own diagram of the cube. Figure 2. According to Ernst, the cube encompasses within itself the projection of two different realities. We obtain the first when we assume that points 1 and 4 are close to us, and points 2 and 3 are further away. In the other reality, points 2 and 3 are close, and 1 and 4 further away. But it is also possible to see points and 2 and 4 in the front and 1 and 3 in the back. However, this contradicts our expectation of a cube. For this reason, we do not readily arrive at such an interpretation. Nevertheless, if we give some volume to the skeletal outline of the cube, we can impose said interpretation on the viewer by placing A2 in front of 1 to 4 and C4 in front of 3 to 2.
Nu drog jag 4 på 3 plus 4. Men jag kan dra 1, kan jag?
Thus we obtain figure 2b, and this is the basis for Belvedere. End of quote. I will make some summary here, and then we will have some questions. Take a note here, 1370. 1150. 27th of January.
Den här kommer sluta gälla i
The Necker cube has participated before in the Rosen exposure of the classical formula, and it's absolutely excellent. The Necker cube was discovered in 1832, and it was the first physical thing ever to be shown to have two contradictory features. They are truly complementary, and as such they serve as visual, tactile and understandable features for our mind to understand the double nature of reality. Necker himself must have been incredibly amazed, or I would say even scared, when he first discovered, I think you need to hold it still, it's moving a bit. When he discovered that what he thought was one crystal turned out to be two crystals, but never ever two crystals at the same time. And this double nature of reality preceded quantum mechanics with almost 100 years. More things, more understanding and empirical discoveries were needed to go to the final step and have a scientific research experimental understanding of the dual nature of the world. There is also a hint to the before here. What is the before? One way of going about that is to think of the before as containing both states simultaneously at the very same time, being two opposing things that cannot be fitted within the regular three dimensions of the classical model. It shows another paradox, as I explained earlier in the previous summary. It shows that at the very heart of the classical formula lies something you can't really understand. It is not working. It is not doing its job. And those things are, I would say, they are pointers. They are like signs on a path that shows you to the way to quantum mechanics. And very important, you need to take one at a time. If you were to skip any steps, the understanding will not come, since it's also not, as the classical formula indicates, directly graspable. No, it has depth. Skipping one step would stop all understanding that comes beneath or under. Maybe there is a question. Okay, swap. Go.
So this was the best description of Nekekube. Now I understand it myself. We have had it before at other occasions, but now thanks to Rosen I really understand it. Thanks Rosen, if you would watch this. And so this made me think about the famous duck and rabbit picture that Wittgenstein discussed, and I can show it to the viewer. And it made me think, Hans, you who are more familiar with animals, could we bring in a third animal? So we have a rabbit and a duck. Could it also represent hair? If I claim that it represents a hair, would you disagree?
No, it could be.
It could be. So then we have actually, you remember the Schrödinger's cat experiment. So we have three positions. The cat can be dead, live, or both at the same time. So we have three positions before. So we have here also possibly three animals. So the list is infinite. And something that, please can you take this? And I can show it also here. Yeah, you get that here. Perhaps you can frame both. So the thing is that I like homonyms in English, like hair. It's homonym with hair that I don't have, but I should have. So homonyms like hair, the animal, are in a kind of superposition before you hear the context. But when you have the context, the superposition collapses, and then you have only one thing or the other. And context you could actually compare with space. It's the ordinary thing that is what we have before. Is only relationships, like words, like hair and hair. They are some kind of relationships, and the relationship is perhaps language, or I don't know. What do you think about this idea? Like hair homonyms, and that context is like what do you call it, space in some sense.
Maybe it could be helpful to bring up misunderstanding. Put it on.
Yes.
Misunderstanding, which I approached yesterday. We were speaking about dictionary descriptions of a word. Words usually in the dictionary have different meanings. For instance, table could have another meaning in another context. And when you read the dictionary, you find a list of the different meanings. This is not a superposition. It's a simultaneous double or triple meaning or quadruple meaning, and it's contradictory in the deepest sense, in a point taken from the old formula. And do remember, in the dictionary the different descriptions are situated in space. This is a thing that we most usually ignore. When you see a written word, when I see a written word in this text, I look for the pronunciation, I look for the meaning, but I constantly forget that they are actually part of space. And this space is, according to Merleau-Ponty and Rosen, not different from regular, if you like, Newtonian material space. We directly, intuitively think that there is a mental space of meaning, of intention, to use a Saussurean or linguistic term, but we forget the extension, that they are in paper, that there is ink on the paper, and it always takes space. So it's the same space. This is the one dimensionality of Merleau-Ponty that covers all the derived spaces of the Cartesian coordinate system, all the ideas of Saussure, Chomsky, Pinker, whomever you like, who are still participating in trying for themselves to uphold the classic formula. It is a very, very insistent picture that we've all been hypnotized by, for using a Wittgensteinian term. I think I have to conclude here, I'm afraid. I say thank you very much. Have a very pleasant morning, which it still is for a couple of minutes. Bye bye.
Thank you for being a Scotland. Thank you.